Hello and welcome to Insights, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is good to be back on the program. Today we review the state of the economy, the president's palliatives put in place to reduce the economic hardship being felt by Nigerians, arising from general increases in the prices of goods and services, of course the fallout of the end of the fuel subsidy regime in Nigeria. Again, we will look at legal ramifications and impact of the first Abuja indigene getting a ministerial nomination coming after the 2018 Court of Appeals judgment. Some say it is justice at last. I'll be just a part of the package as our own Elizabeth Omori is here with me, and I reckon she's all set for this episode. Elizabeth?
Of course. And first, I'm so happy you're back on the program, Nnamdi.
Thank you.
We'll also be beaming a searchlight on MSME's financing. We'll look at implications, challenges, and benefits to stimulate economic growth.
Very well then, let's get this episode started. I'm fascinated with the discourse on national monuments and assets and how much is being done to preserve and
look into the language issue. We have turned English to become like a pride value in our own cultural values.
It's not cash transfer. It's not a COVID-19.
Invasion 1897 was a deliberate
many of these people coming to the urban areas now.
These and applications, there are terms and conditions that
of course it is the union of two people, a man and a woman coming together.
My name is Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori.
Well, as we well know, it's been over a week at least since the president's message to Nigerians in the national broadcast outlining immediate, short-term and long-term measures to cushion the price increase effects of the fuel subsidy removal. Whilst some of the measures may already be in play, it is necessary to continue to assess the feasibility of success by basically reviewing the progress of all of the economic measures directed at making life easier for Nigerians, especially the poor and most vulnerable. Niyi Akinsuju, Policy and Development Analyst, joins me to discuss the state of our economy, some of the President's economic reforms and projected impact. Good to have you here, sir. Welcome to Insight.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege.
So I'm sure you have been monitoring the President's actions over the course of 2 months, a couple of weeks, I should say, since he assumed office, especially decisions over the fuel subsidy removal and the managed floating of the Naira. But we'll take or discuss your assessment in part. And so let's begin with the subsidy issue, knowing the president's stance at this point. Critics of the policy continue to say that the corresponding initial effects on the economy are indicative that absolute removal of fuel subsidy would not augur well for Nigeria, especially when you link the imperatives for fuel energy or fuel energy security and food security, for instance, for a developing country like Nigeria. Is that an assessment you concur with, understanding the difference between complete and phased removal? Do you think it would have made sense, or it would have been okay for the federal government to waver on the path to liberalization?
Well, I thank you for having me once again. I thank you for that, for the question. The truth is that different governments since 1973 or thereabouts, had been implementing phased withdrawal of subsidy. I think from at the time 5 kobo to 8 kobo, and then till we started having the double digits, and of course into the Naira realm. So I don't think it has been successful, that approach, because the issue of fuel removal, the subsidy removal, is not binary. It is not a black and white thing. There are so many factors that are involved. So if you remove a certain percentage, there are the factors of the international price of crude oil.
True.
There's a factor of foreign exchange. There's a factor of domestic logistics processes, and so domestic storage costs, so many cost inputs. And as soon as you remove and any of these factor or cost items increases, they of course fill up that gap that had been created by that face removal. And the important thing is for government to say we have no hand in the determination of the pricing. So the removal actually is to say, government is saying we don't want to be involved in the supplies and distribution of fuel to the Nigerian economy, and therefore encourage the private sector to be involved. So whereas you have had NNPC being the major suppliers, now you now have the independent marketers being the major suppliers. They'll be responsible for their for assessing foreign exchange. They'll be responsible for transporting, securing and transporting fuel. And of course, since we are yet to produce our own domestic petroleum, PMS, they would of course be also be responsible for the bridging costs. Don't forget that at the time, up to recently, we were also paying, government was also paying bridging costs. That is, when fuel lands in Nigeria, government is responsible for the cost of distributing it across the country. Now, government is no longer responsible for that. And the immediate translation of that is that all those cost implications are now taken away from government, and which means money that would have been spent on these processes and these cost items are now saved, and that can be, of course, diverted, channeled into other productive use. Because the reality is that we now know that government being responsible solely for supply and distribution is not good for the economy.
So you talk about realities. So let's talk realities here, and I think we should acknowledge the foundational issues in our realities today, captured in the brewing anger, frustration, and hunger amongst many Nigerians. I need you to dissect the palliatives being put in place by the federal government. Of course, states are also joint partners in these initiatives. And tell us how these measures cascade to putting food on the table, whether it is targeted investments in large manufacturing enterprises or the nano enterprises. Of course, not forgetting the release of grains to households and fertilizers to farmers in all 36 states of the Federation, including the FCT, of course. I guess what I'm asking for is your assessment of the president's plan or plans to reduce the hardship cost by rising cost in the land. Is it too early to call for that?
In honesty, I would need to raise a caveat here. And the caveat is that in the short run, there's no palliative. It is about Nigerians buying into the vision of the president.
That should be the basis first.
That is the basis. It is because when you're talking palliative, no matter the process of connecting with the masses, for instance, there's going to be a time lag. So we cannot be talking of immediate. Even if we are going to start distributing money to people, there will still be a time lag of 1 week, 2 weeks, and all that. So when we are talking of immediate impact, the first impact should be about the individual Nigerian buying into this policy and understanding that in the medium to long run, the Nigerian person will be the better for it. So whereas we are bothered about our GDP per capita, which is just above $2,000, we can say in the next 1 year that our GDP per capita, that is the average GDP that is allocated, in simple terms, to a Nigerian person will increase from that 2,000 plus to near 3,000. Now, that shows that in the long run, the medium to long run, we will have more money in our pockets individually. So the vision by the president is to say, let us stop this, how do I call it, extravaganza. And the analogy I take is this: I used to fill my car with 13,000 naira full tank. Now, when the subsidy was removed, the reality is that I now fill with 32,000 naira. Now, what that tells me is that anytime I filled my car, I was being given 21,000 naira by the government. And for everybody that was spending a certain percentage of his income, on feeding, and now it has increased, it translates that all before now, that is what we have been, that we're earning directly from government. And it's not paying us because we were not channeling it into productive activities. So what the palliative would in the medium, and I want to emphasize that, because don't forget that the president said the threshold, the timeline is between July and March, and it's realistic. The president must be given the honor of being truthful, of being transparent in the way he communicated with Nigerians. Because if he had said immediately, the reality is that we will not start seeing the impact immediately. So between July and March, we will see the application of this palliative.
And that goes for the bulk of the palliatives that he's talking about?
Palliative. So even the grains, for instance, the release of the grains, will not get to the Nigerian household in the next 4 weeks. Yes, the grains are already in the silos, but they will have to be processed, they have to be managed, and they have to be distributed. This cannot be done in 2 weeks. So our reality is that first, we also need to start, adjusting to this new circumstances we have found ourselves.
Mentally,
physically, mentally, and all that. And knowing that at the end of this end of this experience,
yes,
we will be better for it. The Nigerian person, I am saying that the Nigerian person will be able to stand anywhere in the world, yeah, and say we are truly running a strong economy.
Okay, so we know the start point. You've just talked about the end game. But, and I tell you this, Nigerians are more interested, or as it is right now, Nigerians are more interested in what happens in between the start and the end game, the journey in between.
Yeah,
and that's what I want us to talk about here now. I mean, and I know you get what I mean, because you feel the pinch, because you've just talked about how much you used to buy fuel in the past, and it means your purchasing power has been reduced. And then if Nigerians need to wait from now up until March next year and prepare themselves psychologically, emotively for what is to come, I mean, how do they cope in that in between, the journey in between the start and the end point? That's where these palliatives come in, and how quickly they can begin to address the pains being felt, in the in-between journey. And like you said, I mean, we need to be prepared for this. But then, can I quickly just, and earlier on we talked about how states will be involved in also disbursing or, carrying out some of these initiatives as enumerated by the president in his remarks. And then again, we're reminded of similar interventions. I mean, like these ones being put in place by the federal government, that the federal and states would need to deal with. And there are concerns over implementation of some of these policies, especially when you throw issues like corruption into the mix. How differently do you expect that these interventions that you've talked about, that will begin to make the difference, say sometime next year, should be implemented? Do you think maybe we could, if MDAs like it was done in the past are implementing agencies, do you think perhaps we should begin to think of special purpose vehicles in the implementation of some of these policies?
I think we have special purpose vehicles themselves. The fact of each unit of those palliatives are actually special purpose vehicle by its own definition. The implementing body, would be the MDAs, but because they are the entities, institutions naturally endowed and capacitated, to take care of these things. But the difference that I would canvass is to have the players, the industry or sectoral players involved in the formation or the putting together of the framework of implementation. So for instance, I expect NASIMA, I expect Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, I expect Lagos Chamber of Commerce, because it's perhaps one of the strongest chambers of commerce in Nigeria. NASIMA is the Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce, industry, Nasima, industry, mining, and agriculture.
That's correct.
You know, now these are industry players that understand the environment, you know, of production, you know, and if you have 75 billion to share amongst possible 75 entities, I think these people, because they are practitioners, they are involved from day to day in the activities of production, would have an understanding of who and who should be able to benefit from this kind of intervention. The 3,000 CNG buses, it will not be out of place to have the Ministry of Transport in truth, Ministry of Transport, and the North W, and the Road Transport Employers Association of Nigeria. These people have been managing, in fact, they were part of the last palliatives, you know. So they understand what process to go. What I'm trying to say is, don't make them end users. Let them be part of the process of not even the implementation, of framing the process itself, so that there's a clear framework that the industry players and eventual beneficiaries will be part of, and in so doing there will be ownership of the palliative in the first instance. If you are talking about the agricultural side of the intervention, release of fertilizers, release of seedlings and grains and all that, agriculture, there are so many agricultural associations. The Rice Farmer Association of Nigeria, the Maize Farmer Association of Nigeria, all those associations need to be part of the implementation process. And I'm sorry,
yes,
it's not implementation. Forming the framework, you know, constructing the framework for the implementation. Because when you say implementation, it means that the framework had been agreed on and then you are now implementing. It is wrong.
So now you're alluding to the methodology for implementation.
For implementation itself, so that the eventual beneficiaries are part of the process from the very beginning. Now, we will not get to a situation where people will start coming out and start raising issues and around suspicions and all that, that the implementations are not being properly conducted, because one, they were not even part of the method of framing the methodology, as you put it.
I mean, well, that does make a lot of sense. And I'd like to take you back to your earlier on when you made remarks on the liberalization of the oil and gas sector somewhat, and you talked about the different components that makes up this the value chain, and how one aspect can affect or impede, impact on the other. And then you did make allusions to local refinery or local production of PMS in the country. We've seen all that is playing out. We've heard what the president said. He's made it clear that he's not oblivious of what is happening across the country. He's acknowledged that there are dark times ahead, but he's also said he came with the promise of a new dawn. So let's talk about, like I said, that thing that lies in between the start of the journey and the target destination again, especially on this issue of fuel energy sufficiency, which is a national emergency as it is right now. We've already assumed a position, that says we'll put a cap, or rather we'll say, no, price tag methodology, no, that's only, we're allowing market forces to do the needful. Isn't there also rather a major need to now put pressure on the completion of local refineries, as that might also factor in supply cost reduction? You already said so. You made allusions to it, so that's why I'm pushing this conversation back to you, so you can just hammer on that a bit more.
Of course, if ramping up local refinery capacity is important, it should be the given. What we are doing now is actually the unusual. We are a primary crude oil producing country, and up till of recent, we were the 6th largest, in the world. You don't have such deposits of crude oil, and you create a state of energy insecurity willingly and deliberately, by more or less castrating your refinery capacity, because it has been the major economics of primary products. That when you produce a primary product, you must add value by processing. Refineries are the processors. So you now wonder why governments after government had not been able to put a refinery together. Of course, we know how much money has been spent on refineries. But going forward, if our refineries today are productive, we'll save money on the cost of transportation. We'll save money on insurance. We'll save money on even lightning, because our ports can't take large vessels. So when the crude oil, when the PMS being brought into the country gets anchored in our waters, we still need to hire light vessels, to go and pick them in portions to our port. That is added cost. So when you look at all this, and of course the bridging, we will not be looking at moving products from one end of the country, Lagos, to the other end, Maiduguri, or to Sokoto and all that. If Kaduna is producing, Kaduna takes care of northern region, for instance. When Port Harcourt is producing, when Warri is producing, you have sufficiency along that line. So to a large extent, you are saving costs, and that savings would reflect on the eventual price or pricing template of the products that get to the consumers.
Well, fast losing time, I would like to very quickly, before I let you go, flip our conversation to the issue of debt management. And again, I have read various, analogies on the perspective of managing, managing our debt profile and debt profile, I beg your pardon, including freeing up cash flow by refinancing our debt using a longer term debt finance with moratorium period, of course. The last I heard from DMO was that our debt stood a little, or had risen by 370.5%, and that was sometime this year. I think I don't have the exact month. But I would like to know, what in your expert opinion, going forward, what in your, should be our focus on this issue, especially when you consider that we still have issues to contend with. Issues like mismanagement of funds, balance of trade, and even fiscal prudence.
Is it where transparency comes in? Is where government distances itself, from the direct management of products, of the economy, and even debt, as it were. Now, we also need to remind Nigerians that we need to understand the character of our debt. We have more than 65% or thereabout of the Nigerian debt in the local economy. It's local economy. So when you see people buy treasury bills, for instance, when they buy FGM bonds and all that, they are actually lending money, to government. So it's a domestic thing that can be managed easily. The other 38 to 40%, of the debt portfolio, it's foreign. And in that foreign, about 24% of that foreign portfolio, the portfolio, is multilateral and bilateral. And usually these multilateral and bilateral loans are long-term loans. So you have about 18%, 16 to 18% of that portfolio to worried about, because that's that was taken from the Eurobond, the international capital market, and where that one is principally commercial and it is seen as commercial. So it is that one that we worry ourselves about. But I think the government has shown good faith. Just about a month or so ago, a $500 million due Eurobond was paid. And so to a large extent, there is no fuse really on Nigeria's debt, especially the foreign debt. And of course, the local debt can be managed. But again, the source of this debt is actually the fuel subsidy we are talking about. Because if government was not borrowing money, to fund the subsidy, we will not largely, be incurring such kind of debt. If we are going to incur debt at all, it will go into productive activities. And now we are saying that we have been able, the president told us that we have been able to save 1 trillion naira. That 1 trillion naira, if it was not saved, will also mean that we'll be borrowing 500 billion naira somewhere to take care of something.
I'm wondering how much 1 trillion naira is worth now, as against how much it was worth like 3 months ago. I mean, isn't that something we should also talk about?
A major indicator of the positive nature of that was S&P, one of the global rating agencies, increasing our rating, our credit rating from negative to stable. Within 2 months of, it's the removal is just about 2 months.
Cherry news there.
Cherry news.
Yeah, cherry
so
news.
it shows that policy is at work. It is not going to be perfect going forward, but now we know that there is a policy to manage the economy, and that's the guidance. It's like a real guidance for the economy, and it's important we all buy into it, knowing that eventually we will, rather than have my 13 million or 15,000 naira when I go buy fuel, pour into my tank, I will have that in form of some fiscal returns to me going forward, and that will be more productive.
I think on this note, I would like to end our conversation there. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on Insight to talk about these issues, to give your insight on these rather delicate issues. Nia Kinsuju, Policy and Development Analyst. You are a regular on our program. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on Insight.
It's a pleasure and privilege at the same time. Thank you so much.
Elizabeth Omori is up next, and she will be coming with another quite delicate but germane issue to discuss.
President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, in his last nationwide broadcast, announced that his administration recognizes the importance of micro, small and medium-sized enterprises and the informal sector as players of growth, and the federal government will energize this very important sector with 125 billion. Out of the sum, 50 billion naira will be spent on conditional grants to 1 million nano businesses between now and March 2024. The target is to give 50,000 each to 1,300 nano business owners in each of the 774 local government areas across the country. Amidst the economic realities, how would this translate to wealth generation for micro, small and medium enterprises? My guest, Anibe Achimogo, President, National Coaching Association of Nigeria, will speak to us. Mr. Achimogo, thank you so much for joining us on Insights.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's have a quick assessment of operations of MSMEs in Nigeria. You are a player in the nation's business arena. So are these businesses really thriving the way they ought to?
Well, thank you for your question, but if you permit me to maybe express much more the importance of the MSME in the world globally. It is MSMEs account for 90% of businesses and 60 to 70% of employment, and upwards of 50% of the global GDP. And in contrast, for Nigeria, 40 million MSMEs exist, 40 million plus exist. They also contribute about 59 million in terms of employment, which from statistics is about more than 80% of the workforce of Nigeria. And it equally contributes close to 50% of our GDP. So you can see how important it is. And for that reason, the United Nations deemed it necessary to declare June 27th every year as the World MSME Day. And of course, it is to ensure that we understand the importance of the MSME, and governments themselves also appreciate the importance of MSMEs. Their contribution to the at least definitely 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals are captured under the MSME, and of course they drive the well-being of national socio-economic factor in each country.
I would say this move is a game changer for business owners, But how do we get business clusters to benefit? Because at this point, I want to believe several factors would be at play for any business owner to access the funds.
Yes, I mean, the initiative by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is a welcome development, obviously, and the fact that they've recognized, or he has recognized, the importance of the MSME is equally commendable. And for the fact that, of course, he is also a private sector participant, he also knows the value. That reversing the current trend where government seems to be the driver of the economy rather than the private sector is something that will benefit our nation going forward. Yes, we do. I mean, it is important that even this pronouncement and the initiatives and the intervention does get to the right MSMEs, the right owners, the right businesses. And perhaps we may even begin to look at it sectorially, so to speak, and see where the low-hanging fruits are and where we can actually find the impact more. Because certainly if they are employing more than 80% of the workforce of the nation, it means that if you rightly target the MSMEs, it will trickle down. And this palliative, this move to ensure that Nigerians come out of this hardship or out of their hardship definitely is through these MSMEs. So the selection process is going to be very important. We have to make sure that it is trickling down to the right MSMEs so that they can pass it on to Nigerians at large. So it is work that needs to be done sincerely, and work that needs to be done with a lot of care to make sure that this impact is felt.
This impact is felt. Now, this program, the president says, will drive financial inclusion amongst MSMEs. Each will be able to get between 500,000 to 1 million at 9% interest per annum and repayment period of 36 months. Will accessing these funds, will the policies be flexible? Let's take, for example, cluster businesses.
Well, I think, definitely, yes, it will be accessible. First and foremost, the financial inclusion means that whichever business owner, which MSME is participating, then definitely they have to take their details. They have to open bank accounts and have their BVN and so on and so forth captured. So that's the financial inclusion aspect. I think the DG of Smiden also mentioned about common facility centers, where you are bringing MSMEs together to be able to at least reduce the cost of operations, where MSMEs are forced in our country, unfortunately, to fund their own power requirements, infrastructure, and so on and so forth, security. Bringing them to a common facility center will definitely reduce the cost of operations. The truth of it is that we want more, and more should be done, I believe. I believe that, for instance, the 36 months repayment is good, is a good start. There's need to give a long-term period for businesses to be able to, recover and then be able to service their facilities. I still believe that maybe 9% is still high. They need to look at it. And I think, with interventions, having understood the importance of the MSME, then it's important that we are very deliberate. But to be deliberate means that we have to look around the world, particularly look at Nigeria, look at Africa. Well, let's not forget that we have this African Continental Free Trade Agreement in place, which means, and Nigeria is a huge market, which means that everybody will be targeting Nigeria. But for us to be competitive, we need to be able to give ourselves some advantages. So if, for instance, the 9% can be like 5% or below 5%, I think that's a significant advantage that will be brought to bear on the MSMEs in Nigeria. So we need to look at that, those factors that other countries may not be contending with. But from what the government of Nigeria through President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is trying to do is to impact. It's like a social intervention. It's an intervention that is not to be looked from the side of a normal business or the normal climb of business. It's a deliberate intervention to ease the problems, to ease the challenges of MSME owners and of course their staff, their employees. So that deliberate action of reducing further the interest rate, to me, we should see it actually in the benefits of the objectives of intervention in the first instance. I believe that, you know, we have the technology already on ground for monitoring and supervision. We have the skill sets available. And I think it's just trying to get it right, doing the right thing, putting the mechanisms in place, which already exist, like I said. It's just to be able to implement effectively. Implementation is key. And I hope that that will be done in this light.
Implementation is key. But really, why is implementation of policies always a problem when we talk about business?
For instance, design a policy for a particular sector, let's say, for instance, the cotton, textile and garment sector, and you do not involve the players in the development of this policy, then of course when it comes to implementation, you'll find too many gaps. And with gaps, that means the objective of in the first instance for establishing such policies will not work. So I do know that, for instance, players have their own issues, obviously. There's not everybody that is sincere in terms of ensuring that whatever it is that the intervention is meant to bring is, you know, carried out. But that is, I think, maybe if you say out of 10, maybe that's just 1 or 2, you know. The other 8, you know, would actually succeed. But I think we need to take the sector, if it is a sectoral approach, that sector must be fully involved in the policy development and in the implementation. But if you leave it in the hands of those that are not businessmen, let me say, people that are, for instance, are to develop a policy and implement it and are not players in that sector, I believe that, of course, the challenge will be there. There will be so much gap that you will not be able to achieve the objective of that policy in the first instance.
All right, talking about challenges, there are several challenges confronting MSMEs in Nigeria, from lack of capital to lack of structure, packaging, state financial policies, several of them. Are there things we are not doing to create enabling platforms for our businesses?
Well, I mean,
because many people are still interested.
Yes, well, truly. I mean, there's a lot we need to do. For instance, it's very difficult and challenging to be a MSME owner, player, nano business, and so on and so forth. Because there are factors of production that are required. There are success factors that will enable your business to thrive. And if those things are not there, they are beyond your control. How do you handle insecurity, for instance? You know, for instance, again, I refer to the CTG sector. You can't safely go to the farms to farm because of insecurity. You know, then you talk about power, which is critical. If you are a ginner like I am, and you take your ginnery and bring it to Abuja, and you are saying, oh, because of power, then you imagine the cost of transportation of your raw materials. So you have to move your ginnery, your processing factory, closer to where your raw material is. There's no power. You have the challenge of inadequate or inefficient road network, you know, and so many other issues that you have to contend with. So these things, yes, for the immediacy of addressing the challenges of MSMEs, of course you have to do something. But in the long run, we need to begin to look at how our rural economies, or infrastructure rather, would be put into play. You know, those things must be available. Power must be available. So yes, when you talk about common facility centers, for instance, it's a good idea because you can draw those things, bring those things together where MSMEs can actually benefit even at a lower rate of engagement of those services.
Now tell us, how are Nigerians actually faring at this time?
Yes, at the moment, I think it is still very difficult for GINers because, for instance, I always say that as a GINer, you have investment of more than 500 million, for instance, in equipment. That equipment that you have, you cannot convert it into processing any other commodity, any other raw material except cotton. So, and if you don't have cotton, sustainable production of cotton to feed your ginnery, then you are nowhere. I think as we speak, perhaps we're not doing up to 10% of our installed capacities. But when you look at the cotton value chain, it is so important because the so-called MSMEs that we're talking about can be generated a great deal through the cotton value chain, because there's no aspect of cotton that is wasted, from the farm into the processing of cotton into, for instance, if you are farming and then you add a ginnery and you add an oil mill to your operations, you generate more than 9 revenue streams, which means that each revenue stream obviously would engage, would employ Nigerians, you know, and of course industrialization also commences. So it is a driver of industrial revolution. It can be, it was, it still can be. So it's difficult at the moment, to be honest, because we are not having the raw material in abundance the way we ought to. Now, if you look back, what is the challenge in that? The challenge obviously is with the farmers. The farmers are not getting enough support. They are not getting the type of inputs they require. For instance, you can give a farmer fertilizer and agrochemicals and everything, but he has poor planting material, poor planting seed. He won't be able to achieve much. And that is like you have wasted our money, so to speak, in the other inputs. So we need to be deliberate about these things. But I know that it can contribute to the goals of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, or his objective to ensure that Nigerians are employed. And we're talking about youth and women, particularly as well. This CTG sector has the capacity to do that. If you talk about the palm oil, you talk about rubber, these are value chains, extensive value chains that can impact positively on our nation.
On our nation. Anibe Achimugu, I want to thank you so much for joining us on Insight today. Thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
And just before we go, we did tell you we'll bring up the issue of the FCT nomination, the nomination of a native as ministerial nominee for the FCT. Over the last decades, and definitely earlier than that, various groups representing indigents of the Federal Capital Territory lamented what it termed political exclusion, seeking a federal integration policy that recognizes their political value and contributions and addresses most of their concerns. I'm sure you, if you do not remember, but if you've heard of the struggle of late Musa Baba Panya, I mean, and that comes to mind, especially now, a lawyer who was an indigene of the FCT. He began the struggle, the legal struggle that culminated in the 2018 Court of Appeal judgment, which described the inability of previous administrations to appoint a ministerial nominee from the FCT as a gross violation of the Constitution. Well, that is all ended now with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu finally nominating Zephaniah Gisalu, a native of Abuja, as FCT's representative in the Federal Executive Council. I'd like to welcome my next guest, James Alassan, the lawyer and public affairs analyst. He joins me here in the studio to discuss this issue. Barrister, welcome to Insight.
Thank you so much.
So, Barrister, I don't know if you read The Guardian. I read The Guardian as with other national dailies. I follow a columnist on The Guardian, who writes for The Guardian, I beg your pardon. His name is Martin Zoloja. He had a piece, August 6th, just a couple of them days back, in his column for The Guardian newspaper. It was centered on this whole issue of the nomination of an Abuja native as ministerial nominee. He began by quoting late activists, and I'm sure you know this person, former U.S. Representative John Louis, who in response to the killing of George Floyd at the time in the USA and the police response, he said, and I would like to quote, he said, sorry, I have it there, democracy cannot thrive where power remains unchecked and justice is reserved for a select few. Ignoring these cries and failing to respond to this movement is simply not an option, for peace cannot exist where justice is not served. I need you to talk to me on this whole concept of justice, you know, and this whole concept of justice and how it relates to this instant, this matter, subject matter that we have before us. Especially when we think about when, you know, the appeals court verdict, you know, ruling on this matter came up, and just how long it took for us to get to where we are now. Is it still justice even though it has been delayed for so long?
Indeed, for the indigents of the FCT, better late than never.
That's
It's
true.
a struggle that has been long coming. And thanks to the current administration that had deemed it fit to indeed do what the indigents of the FCT have long been asking for. If you ask me, indeed, yes, justice has finally come.
You know, there's also, there's usually the question of how the law can, you know, once again be recognized or is recognized as a tool for social justice and peace building. Is that what we're seeing play out here?
It is. It is. One can safely say that, because the discussions all around, from my interaction with several people, there has always been linked to the Court of Appeal judgment. So indeed, one can safely say that yes, the judiciary has contributed in this political development that is a welcome development for the indigents of the FCT. Can safely be said.
Okay, so I know that, I mean, we've referenced past agitations, you and I, and how they anchored their argument for a native to be, you know, to be a minister, number one, but then more importantly, to be a minister of the FCT, you know. And I would like to say and make it very clear that the Constitution does not state that the FCT minister must be, you know, a nominee from Abuja or from the FCT, you know. And would it, and this is my question to you, would it be too much? Well, I mean, considering all of what has transpired over the years and where we are now, would it be too much to yet again ask this government, for instance, for some sort of concession, or, you know, for a particular concession where perhaps the FCT nominee can then be the FCT minister? Would that make for a logical appeal?
It would, and like the proverbial Oliver Twist, who keeps asking for more, the FCT indigents should seize the moment. This current administration has come across as a government that listens to agitations to Nigerians. Take, for example, the issue of the palliatives. By the time Nigerians spoke up, the government soft pedal on that. Now that the indigents have gotten a nomination, there will be nothing wrong for them to push further for the FCT to be assigned to.
What difference would that even make? You think it will make any difference if an indigent, for instance, is you think he would then know what the FCT needs more than the man who is probably not from the FCT?
Well, it's obvious that an indigent will know more about the FCT than an outsider coming. It's just to prepare them and a challenge to them. Other states are doing it. They have been agitating. We can do it. The issue of a mayor is still in the pipeline. But let's start with the ministerial slot for now. If peradventure they are lucky, like I said, they pray and they still mount pressure on the government, and government deems it necessary to consider them for the FCT, so be it. If they get there, the onus is on them to live up to the expectation that indeed, if we are given the opportunity, we can manage the FCT like any other person can do, or even better than non-indigenous. Because we know our people, we know what is required, we know everything about the FCT. So it will not be out of place if they are considered for the minister in charge of the FCT.
You know, talking about pushing for more, this whole, you know, scenario, do you think I mean, this all result for inclusion or clamor for inclusion,
yes.
The result of the clamor for inclusion at the federal executive level, do you think it hates, you know, to further the clamor for legal deliberations for perhaps an extended slot for the FCT at the National Assembly level? Of course, that will require constitutional amendment,
yes.
wouldn't it? But do you think it helps in pushing for that fight, that
Definitely,
clamor?
I agree with you. Like I said, this is like the foundation now. More opportunities would spring out from this nomination. It depends on how the indigents manage these nominations. Other things that are in the pipeline, as this first step has been taken, subsequently we continue to build on it till we get to even the ultimate mayor for the FCT. So it's going to be an ongoing process. Thank God we have an administration that has set the ball rolling. Subsequent developments would build and add up to this nomination that this administration has availed the indigents of the FCT. So it's an ongoing
conversation.
process.
I mean, it's something we will be monitoring because I mean, this has come. Well, it's finally here, like you said, in this instant, justice at last, whether delayed or eventually better delayed than never, like you said. So I think we'll go with that. James Alassan, a lawyer, public affairs analyst, I would like to thank you so much for coming on our program, Insight, and speaking on this issue. Thank you so much indeed.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Amina Mohammed, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala.
Agencies and stakeholders to proactively tackle these challenges.
Women in most countries of the world constitute about 50% of registered voters.
Williams, reporting for Dateline 360.
In Jos, Caleb Gochin, Dateline 360.
Naja'atu Tijani.
Dateline 360. Shidi Okrafo.
For Dateline 360.
In Lagos, Michael Olaleye.
Reporting for Dateline 360.
I am Omotola Omojola. Thanks for tuning in to Dateline 360.
And that's it on the program on this episode. Join us same time next week for more on Insights. My name is Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.